One afternoon, on a chilly fall day, I sat across from one of my advisees. He strode in and took a seat and flashed his signature smile. We agreed that it was wild to consider that he had only one more semester left before he graduated. How time flies. He shared that it was bittersweet. He shared that it was true, what he had been told, that these would be among the best years of his life. And I could be wrong, but I think his eyes were moist, and I felt it. I shared the feeling of joy and satisfaction on his behalf. I genuinely felt that he deserved this, and why not? We discussed his future plans and his registration. I gave him his last ever PIN so that he can register, and we said our goodbyes, and I haven't seen him since. Not 15 seconds later, another student took the same seat. Her shoulders were slumped, her eyes downcast, her voice barely a whisper. I asked her how she was doing, and I inquired about her experiences on campus so far, and her eyes welled up, and a flood of tears flowed. Her chin quivered, and her voice cracked, and she shared, "I don't fit in. I don't feel connected to my friend group. Group work is hard. I can't relate to the other students. I miss my family. I don't want to be here at all. I thought it would be better." Unmistakably, not the best years of her life. And a version of this scenario repeats every semester. But the timing of these specific two advising meetings stood out to me. What also stood out to me was that while these experiences may be attributed to individual differences, are they? The first student was white, the second black. What also stands out to me is that the same context could be experienced so differently by students depending on their positionality relative to systemic oppression. These curiosities and the desire to become a better teacher and to understand and address the needs of historically marginalized students animate my research and my practices in the classroom. So through my work, I strive to honor their stories, illuminate the problems, and aspire to solutions. That is why I'm so grateful that the Rocky Mountain Psychological Association and my direct contact, Clayton, invited me to share some of my research related to students' experiences on college campuses and what may help to create more inclusive campus communities and to increase sense of belonging amongst our students. I'm also grateful for the opportunity to learn about the Tiwa people and visit their homelands. I honor their presence here, now, and that of their ancestors. But first, let me tell you my reasons for approaching my research as I do. There are certain limitations to psychological science that I try to address. Historically, psychologists have been more interested in psychological universals or shared mental attributes over psychological attributes that are specific to culture-sharing groups or to specific contexts. Psychological universals are important to understand, unmistakably, but not sufficient to explain the mental health impact of oppression. I want to know when there are differences that emerge related to the meaning of consequences of being part of social groups and how that might impact their well-being in their specific context. But not only that, psychological universals are limited by the extensive use of undergraduate students in colleges and universities as study samples. I mean, I love my students, but the preponderance of psychological theories based on Western, middle-class, college-educated young adults is partly due to convenience and low expense. Unfortunately, intersectionality research examining how interlocking systems create disparate experiences and outcomes for marginalized groups is still scarce, although thankfully it is growing. And psychopolitical questions are often seen as biased, as if their absence is not also a sign of bias. In my view, a multi-level program of research that employs varied methodological approaches is essential if we are to more fully understand the influence of culture and context on well-being and to combat oppression. Lastly, problems inherent in paradigms that drive our methods are rarely acknowledged. In other words, what does the research design say about what the researcher thinks is going on? What are the values and assumptions inherent in our approaches? And this is where I'm coming from. But what is sense of belonging? According to Strayhorn, in terms of college, sense of belonging refers to students' perceived social support on campus, a feeling or sensation of connectedness, and the experience of mattering, or feeling cared about, accepted, respected, valued by, and important to the campus community or others on campus, such as faculty, staff, and peers. Sense of belonging matters because students who report higher sense of belonging also engage more deeply with their studies and ultimately are more likely to persevere and succeed academically. Not only that, but students who report a higher sense of belonging are more likely to seek out and use campus resources. And guess what? Those supports will also help their success and their well-being. What about when students experience trials and tribulations on campus? Well, sense of belonging serves as a protective factor against stress and ill-being. Low sense of belonging can negatively affect mental and physical health, including compromising one's immune response. And we can thank psychoimmunologists for this insight. In a recent study with a national sample, most students somewhat agreed that they felt part of their college. And this is good. That's really good news. Yet, there were important distinctions that may inform my observations of those advisees that I told you about earlier. That is that underrepresented minority students at four-year colleges reported significantly lower sense of belonging than majority students. And first-generation college students also reported lower sense of belonging than students whose parents had attended college. Well, let's take a step back for a moment and ask, what predicts sense of belonging? A great deal of research on sense of belonging has focused on campus communities and climate. However, sense of belonging is context dependent. This is really interesting for us to consider. A student might feel a high sense of belonging in one class and a low sense of belonging in another. So it's not a generalized experience. And this tells us then that we probably can't solve this one by observing and changing just the students. We must consider our context and what it says about our attitudes or what it communicates implicitly, explicitly, intentionally, or unintentionally, what it communicates to them. It's important then to examine the characteristics of our environment. I'm keenly interested in how historically marginalized individuals perceive their campus climate, as well as interlocking systems that perpetuate inequity. And this has been my path to understanding why some people fit in and others do not, or why some develop a sense of belonging and some don't. So I'm going to draw from these two qualitative studies that I conducted. The first was with Latinx students, and they participated in focus groups and in interviews to examine cultural socialization, identity development, and the college experience. The second was with students who were historically marginalized by race, sexual orientation, gender, and culture, and This study sought to examine perceptions of diversity, climate, and the psychological well-being of these students. Arguably, problems in diversity climate translate to poor sense of belonging. So what did they perceive about the diversity climate? They perceived that the pressure of academic success was matched by the culture shock at what they perceived as a white and wealthy university where these studies took place. The demographics of the student body served to augment for them the salience of their ethno-racial identities and sparked a reawakening of identity exploration. In concert with this, there was a limited representation of people from their nationality and their ethnicity, and that further heightened feelings of threat, isolation, and not fitting in. A student saw important links between the setting and her emotional health. And she said, my anxiety and my depression has just kind of increased because I'm here. And I think it's here physically, but also having to put my energy mentally into different things that I wouldn't have to if I was in school back home. The stressors included many instances where I've heard people being racially discriminated against or just being called racial slurs walking down the street at night through cars. All participants questioned their fit at the institution and community and struggled with extraordinary loneliness, self-doubt, and psychological distress. So, why would they put themselves in this context then? Well, all participants viewed their decision to attend the institution as an opportunity for social and upward mobility. Many participants received financial packages that they could not refuse. And despite that extensive support, many were suspicious and believed that they were recruited to make the university look good. To that effect, a student stated, I'm technically an employee of the university to diversify the white kids' experience. Like, I'm tokenized, there's no going around that. They shared that although the setting was not ideal, their perseverance was essential to recompense their parents for the sacrifices they made to help them grow into successful individuals. And although this is really hard to hear, are they entirely wrong? A similar perspective emerged in the other study. Same institution, different participants, not the same ones in both studies because they were enough years apart that they were in a different class. The groups unanimously asserted that race, wealth, and other intersecting identities on campus shaped their college experience, and that these characteristics had negative and consequential impacts on their well-being. Their beliefs were based on various sources, including the predominantly white and heteronormative characteristics of the students, faculty, and staff at the university, and resulting interpersonal experience from that. The workload from campus, not classes, jobs, interfered with the academic demands, resulting in considerable stress. One student stated, my first impression was like, I don't belong here at all. The fact that I have to work 4 jobs on campus so I can eat right on campus, very distressing. In light of those observations, these students questioned their purpose at the university. Some believed that they were recruited to enrich the experiences of students with dominant identities on campus and to improve the university's image as a diverse and progressive institution. They pointed to images designed to attract more students like me on campus, they said, but I just don't see more genuine attempts, they said. One student described how the accumulation of these practices and policies impacted him. He said, you have to make note of these inconsistencies that you see day to day on campus. At the back of your head, that just deteriorates your mental health. Ultimately, in their view, the university climate precipitated or exacerbated psychological distress and did not build belonging. But institutions are not responsible for family wealth, but they are responsible for ensuring that each student invited to campus is poised to learn. That means books, food, laundry. Students should not have to struggle this much to learn compared to their peers. Sense of belonging scholars argue that what we need to feel like we belong is a common goal. And these students did not seem to think that all students were there for the same reason. That's something we could work on. Students who feel greater belonging are more likely to use campus resources. Thus, we were interested in understanding student help-seeking behaviors and their perceptions of the counseling center. Students reported experiencing the counseling center as an extension, actually, of the university. Participants in all groups discussed difficulties feeling comfortable at the counseling center. They expressed that the differences between the counselor's identity and their own made it difficult to feel connected because they wondered if the counselor understood them or could relate to their experiences. And while some participants strongly believed that nothing except a shared experience could bridge the disconnect, others acknowledged that the counselor's initiative and cultural awareness was helpful and not damaging. For example, some students found it helpful when a counselor linked their mental health concern with societal marginalization where appropriate, and acknowledged the cultural differences between client and counselor. They felt uncomfortable when counselors became overwhelmed by their life stories or their hardships, and when counselors danced around diversity issues. And this makes sense, because identity match is not actually the best predictor of psychotherapy success. Worldview, therapeutic alliance are actually stronger. So these students found that even though counseling was sometimes uncomfortable, it was helpful and positive. One student stated this and recommended this to us counselors. The fact that she's like, I don't really get everything that you have experienced, but I'm going to try, and I'm going to find resources for you that can address these issues. A factor that made it easier to seek mental health services was when a staff person or a friend strongly encouraged them to seek this resource. A warm referral gave them the needed push, especially from a friend. And makes sense because sense of belonging is based on relationships and mattering, and having someone look out for them help them feel more connected. The students struggled to feel included in the campus community. They reported difficulties finding spaces where they felt physically and emotionally safe and welcomed on campus, and exerted a great deal of effort coping with this exclusion, which diminished their sense of belonging. One student shared, I had to fight to find spaces where I feel comfortable, and I'm very glad that I have found these spaces now, but I feel as though I wish that I could have just been like, oh, I came to university, and this is my school. I feel comfortable here. And this might have been related to an issue of transition. Earlier students had a harder time than students more advanced in their degrees. Upper level students described a stronger sense of belonging compared to first-year students. Students agreed that in the beginning, finding your community is really hard. Not knowing where to turn for help and support contributed to the challenges of their first year. Upper level students relied on formal and informal supports, and that significantly improved their college experiences after their first year. A student said, if I didn't have a good group of friends here, I'd be struggling more. Yeah, it sucks. I'd much prefer none of us were struggling, but at least having them there so that I feel less isolated and less upset is good. Struggling together is better than struggling alone. And there is a bittersweet reality to this as well, that despite the challenges, most of the students in both studies embarked in a critical consciousness-raising journey that was at times burdensome to them, yes, but also empowering. Importantly, it was abundantly clear that the college context either initiated or accelerated the students' intensive period of self-reflection and this consciousness journey. This consciousness-raising journey may never have happened if not for the hardship and devaluation that they observed on campus. Here's an example. Speaking to the people that I speak to here definitely has opened my eyes to a lot of things that I just wasn't aware of before I got here. I've come out with a lot of different values, I guess, after coming here. And I'm not a person to go up in front of a lot of people and just say everything I think, but I'm definitely finding the right place and time for comments and stuff. That is, experiences on campus, has inclined me more towards social justice. Well, students also discussed the importance of our courses in the development of their critical consciousness, which is good because helping students develop a critical analysis of their experiences is healing. In essence, struggle is not inherently bad, but having the resources to cope is essential. Beyond interpersonal experiences, are there ways in which apparently innocuous policies and practices may affect student well-being indirectly by shaping institutional policies? I really, really strongly believe that we must start to move beyond mere social identity and interpersonal interventions. Although they are important, they never address the root causes. They simply help one to cope with the root causes. It would be like saying, what I need is a stronger racial or ethnic identity, when what I want to tell you I need is no more racism. One of my student collaborators and I took a closer look by examining structural stigma. Structural stigma refers to societal level conditions, cultural norms, and institutional policies that constrain the opportunities, resources, and well-being of the stigmatized. Structural stigma, as measured by laws and social policies, has been associated with so many health behaviors and health outcomes. And so our goal was to analyze the association between the frequency of affirming information on counseling center websites about LGBTQ people and state-level political friendliness. So here's what's going on. Prior research indicates that college students with lesbian, gay, bisexual, transgender, and queer and other identities are at greater risk of experiencing psychological distress compared to their cisgender and heterosexual counterparts because of minority stress associated with societal marginalization. And so this is heightened. These problems are heightened in hostile and heterosexist campus climates. So what we did is that we selected schools from the Integrated Post-Secondary Education Data System, and we also extracted data to create a variable that had 11 items. It was a variable that was composed of information based on our literature review as to what information demonstrates friendliness on a website. And so these are examples. Does the website have a support statement? LGBTQ specific. Does the website include counselor pronouns, counselor training, group counseling specific for LGBTQ folks, peer group, and other similar variables that I'll show you. We also went to the Movement Advancement Project Equality Map, which gave us information about whether every state had hate crime laws, employment non-discrimination, protection, and religious exemption. So whether the state had a full law, partial law, or none at all. And we wanted to see if there was a relationship between the friendliness of the website and the laws in the state. So we extracted data from a representative sample, 15% of all four-year colleges and universities across the United States. So the first part are the 11 items, and what we found in 2019 was that the most frequently cited item was confidentiality statements, and followed by support statement, individual treatment, or counseling sessions, informational, and various informational resources, after hours. All of these were specific to LGBTQ people. And what I found fascinating is at the very least was counselor pronouns. And I think that if we were to redo this today, I think we would see a change in that. So what did we find? The results showed that website friendliness was higher for schools in states with full hate crime protection. We also found that website friendliness was higher for schools in states with than without employment non-discrimination protections. I mean, however, you might recall this was before Bastock versus Clayton County, which granted employment non-discrimination in 2020 based on sexual orientation and gender identity. And there was no significant difference in the amount of LGBTQ plus affirming information on counseling center websites and whether the institution's state had religious exemption laws. Now, what we did is that my school was not randomly selected in the sample, but we still decided to extract the information and pass this information on to the counseling center, and along with the rest of the research. And they went ahead and made modifications to the website and made improvements that hopefully indicate that the first time someone goes to the website, it's often the first contact that they find that it's a more welcoming place. But those are small steps. So taken together, my research findings are consistent with others' findings that inclusive campus communities require attention to climate, well-being, belonging, and institutional policies and practices. In thinking of our spheres of influence as instructors or future instructors or even students, I have distilled and interpreted the literature to offer you some specific and concrete actions that you might be able to consider. When thinking of teaching, what exists in our courses and classroom that may signal belonging? The instructor themselves, peers, content, activities, perhaps assignments, assessments, and institutional climate are some of them, certainly not an exhaustive list. So let's take a look when it comes to instructors. Now, before that, students who withdraw from school report fewer and less positive interactions with their instructors. So, quality student-faculty relationships increase confidence and achievement in challenging courses. So, supportive classroom environments are linked to student success. So, cultivate an attitude of humility, curiosity, and treat students with respect as you offer kindness and supportive resources to learn. Identify and eliminate attitudes of superiority that you may hold of yourself over students. The fact that we have more knowledge and degrees about certain things than our students is not a measure of our self-worth. Also, people often know when they are being looked down upon. It is essential that we extricate that from our approach in teaching. Establish classroom norms that communicate a value for all individuals and diverse epistemologies. Consider, why is it that people may endorse a different truth than yours before shutting down a potential perspective? And there are many benefits to creating cooperative and inclusive classrooms. For example, feelings of connectedness, support, mutual respect, and value. What do they produce? Increased engagement in academic experience and increased perception of self and classroom collective efficacy. We're doing something here together, right? Students who get to know their classmates overwhelmingly report a greater sense of belonging. However, students who report low sense of belonging also explain that their interactions with their peers were partly responsible for that. So encourage respectful and cooperative interactions among students whenever possible. Help students to engage effectively when in groups by providing them the tools for effective engagement. Inform students of contributions of historically marginalized students, not just other psychologists. When it comes to content, connecting learning material to personal experiences increases motivation and belongingness and academic performance. If students can discern a link between the content of the course and who they are, they're more likely to see it as integral to their learning and not just additive. Examine your learning goals. Is it possible to maybe adapt your learning goals to make sure students see how their experiences, cultures, and identities may fit in with the course content? Now, increasing relevance and task value, this is what that would achieve, which is important. Address power and privilege as well in the field. And who and what is represented in the topics covered in your course. In the examples in the class, on the exams, the authors in the readings, is the course content privileging certain identities and representations over others? Can any of these assignments, examples, and readings be changed out to represent different perspectives? Opportunities to learn about the work of diverse psychologists is an effective approach, so that's a good reason to do it. Perhaps you've heard of the BIPOC Psych paper spreadsheet that Professor Erica Wojcik maintains. When it comes to assignments, I attempt to encourage and empower students to cooperate rather than compete in their learning by designing classroom activities and assignments that foster cooperation. And I'll share two examples. Teaching students the skills for effective, culturally responsive discussion. So, as I said before, forming student discussion groups doesn't guarantee that it's going to be productive or even positive. So I now teach them about how to engage in group discussions using the CREATE model. This model teaches students to identify 6 key processes in group discussions, and it also provides students with a structured process for evaluating exactly how the group is engaging with these competencies. Invite students to take an active role in course design. And I admit this might be easier to do with smaller classes, but maybe some of you creative folks can figure out this for larger classes. So preparing students as co-instructors is important to me because it departs from the banking model of education. And as co-instructors, it's aligned with the principles of social learning and active learning. So I invite students to work in pairs to design a class session. They have to review topics, they could select new readings, they create a lesson plan, discussion questions, everything they think should happen in the class. And I have found that carefully worded and well-timed questions on my part allows me to deepen the discussion if needed, to clarify any misinformation, and generally maintain a rigorous discussion. So consider the alignment and the usefulness of alternative approaches to assessing student work. Now, I choose to use a labor-based grading contract. It prizes labor, such as effort, right, over quality for every letter grade. Grades are separated from feedback. So students are graded on completion of assignments based on objective criteria, such as timeliness, number of words written, problems answered, quizzes completed, and they receive ungraded feedback about correctness and quality. It emphasizes process and effort. And it accomplishes some of the essential tasks of conventional grading, which is feedback and progress monitoring, but it also, importantly, builds on some of its limitations. For example, it reduces power dynamics, commonly associated with white middle-class values in education that have systematically excluded people from marginalized groups from educational opportunities. It prizes labor over quality, so it empowers students to focus on the time and effort that they devote to their studies, which is one aspect of learning over which they have substantial control. So learning without penalty, students are free to engage in the labor of learning without fear of getting it wrong, and fostering curiosity and risk-taking, and alleviating excessive stress in the classroom. Effortful engagement with learning is associated with cognitive and non-cognitive goals related to psychological and neuroscience literacy and global citizenship. So it's not perfect, and it will not solve all problems which plague any assessment approach, including some amount of gaming the system in some way. However, it's a mistake to think that those problems do not plague conventional approaches. In institutions of education, identity-based discrimination and diversity climate have been linked to well-being. So a positive diversity climate, right? The perception that the social and professional atmosphere of an institution is inclusive. And add to that negative interpersonal experiences of racism or discrimination can lead to demotivation, disengagement, and dropout if it's not countered with supportive and positive responses. So what I recommend here is to examine student data to ascertain inequalities. Students, for example, in a research methods course could be enlisted to design research that examines student experiences in that course, in the major, or the institution. Examine policies for unintended effects. Use literature reviews, data extraction, and collection to begin to explore these questions. Support policies that expand access and opportunity to students. It's great to be accepted to college, but it is devastating and demoralizing when you do not have the materials to learn. So seek to address the material reality of all students, because being present is not the same as feeling like you belong. Communicate findings to leadership to remind us and them that while we pat ourselves on the back for our incremental equity initiatives, people's lives or hopes and dreams are being crushed while we ask them to be patient, because we now have Diversity Week or some other initiative. And well, that is some kind of progress, isn't it? Well, we all have a limited amount of time. So consider using teaching opportunities to discover more about your institution's climate and belonging, and share it with the appropriate stakeholders. This could be an honors thesis, an independent study project, a research methods course, a statistics course, or any other course where the values of justice meet scholarship of teaching and learning. Now, I have to say, being honest, this is low-hanging fruit. I'll be honest. These changes reflect the least threatening ways to allow underserved and historically marginalized students to find some sense of belonging in places that never had them in mind in the first place. If they are maladjusted, it is because they have a healthy sense of attunement to their social surroundings and the reality, and we should at least acknowledge their perceptiveness before we proceed to change them. In other words, is maladjustment always negative? Is a fever always bad? Maladjustment, then, might be the seed of change. I have two concerns, which I would like us to think on, and they're here on the screen. First, is our concern about student sense of belonging really about the students, or is it more about the institutions worried about the changing demographics of students attending college and about attrition? So sometimes what benefits the institution also benefits the students, but not always. And let us not forget that. Second, when it comes to equity and inclusion, true change would not require that historically marginalized students are included into anything that is pre-existing. It would focus on creating some new structure that welcomes all of us from the outset as valued members. So what I wish for our students is that toward the end of their tenure with us, when they come for the last advising meeting, that more often than not, they can say that they have had an affirming and stimulating experience, one that they would recommend to a friend. Thank you.